more type machine that will detect when you have either 101 or 010 on the previous 3 clock cycles. So what you want to be looking at is what gets you anywhere towards and then when it detects one of those in the previous 3 clock cycles, you'll have an output of 1. Otherwise, output is 0. So I want to think about what gets me towards having one of these sequences. So if I have, I'll just have my reset, so I don't have anything. So I have my reset. And then if I get a 0, then I'm going to go to some state that for right now I'm just going to label as a 0. So right now I have just a 0, and the reason that is a separate state is it's getting me somewhere towards this sequence right here. Now if I get a 1, then I'm going to go to some state that right now I'm going to call just a 1. And that's getting me towards this sequence. So this is a 0 and this is a 1. And if I am in either this state or this state, my output, whatever variable I'll call it W, my output is going to be 0 because I haven't gotten a sequence yet. I just have one thing towards my sequence. Now if I'm in state 0, then I've gotten a 0, and if I get another 0, I haven't proceeded any farther towards either of these sequences, but I also haven't gone backwards. So if I get a 0, I'm just going to stay right in that state. But if I'm in state 0 and I get a 1, then I now have the first 2 digits of the sequence that I'm trying to detect. So that's a new state. So that I can call that 0, 1. But my output is still 0 because I haven't gotten my all 3 yet. So that's if I get a 1. Now if I'm in state 1 and I get another 1, then I'm right back where I started. So I have 1, 1. So I still just have this digit right here. But if I get a 0, so I had a 1, and now I get a 0, well now I have these 2 right here, so that's a new state. So that gets me a 0, and then I have a 1, 0, and that'll be W equals 0. Now if I'm in this state where I had a 0 and a 1, so I had a 0 and a 1, if I get another 1, then I'm actually going back to this state right here, because now on my sequence all I have is a 1, because 1, 1 doesn't do anything for me. But if I have a 0 and a 1 and then I get a 0, well that brings me to a new state. That's 0, 1, 0, and in that state my output will be 1, because in that state that's the state where you output 1, is when you get to when you're in that state, your output is going to be 1 on the next clock cycle. Now if I already did the 1 and this was a 0. Okay, now if I'm in state 1, 0 and I get, so I had 1, I got a 1 and then I got a 0, and then if I get a 1, that gets me to this state, 1, 0, 1, with an output of 1. But if I get a 0, so I had a 1, 0, if I get a 0, that's going to bring me back to this state, and that's right there. And now I still have to figure out, even though this is, I've got the output where the output is 1, I have to figure out what happens for my next state after this. So if I have 0, 1, 0, if in my next state I get a 0, that is going to bring me all the way back to having 1, 0. But if I had a 0, 1, 0 and I get a 1, that brings me to the 1, 0, 1. And similarly, if I have a 1, 0, 1, if the next thing I get is a 1, that brings me back here. But if I'm in 1, 0, 1 and the next thing I get is a 0, that's going to bring me here. So that's a Moore machine. But if I had a Mealy machine, then that detects on the same clock cycle. So a Mealy machine detects on the same clock cycle. So I could reuse this same setup, but it's going to be a little bit different at the end here. So let me get that set up. So let's see, I've got my reset. Zero. And in the final product, you would give these like names, like not necessarily like 0 and 1. So 0, 0, 1, 0, where this is listing my output. So, and then 0, 0, 1, 0. This would be 1, 0, and this would be 0, 0. And then here's where things get different, because if I'm in 0, 1 and I get a 1, 0, 1 and I get a 1, then that takes me back here. It's 1, 0. But if I have 0, 1 and I get a 0, then that brings me here with an output of 1. And if I'm in state 1, 0 and I get a 1, that brings me here with an output of 1. If I'm in 1, 0 and I get a 0, that brings me here with an output of 0. So did that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, Mealy's gonna depend on the input and the state, whereas Moore is just gonna depend on the state.
Yes, assuming I remembered correctly. I don't know why I have a block on this. Let me just, I think the homework defines it. Let's see. Um, so more 3 preceding, yeah. And yes, yeah, that is correct. Yep. Yep.